Hello, everybody, and welcome to the G4A show. This is episode 106. If you don't know me, my name is Jordan. I am your weekly host, always here, and the second host, the co-host, kind of rotates on a weekly basis. But the man who's here with me today, the analog stick gamer himself, Jeff Young from analogstickgaming.com, kind of shows up twice a month at the moment, and we'll see how long that keeps going. Jeff, how are you?
I'm doing pretty good. Not too bad.
Good, good. You came up with the topic today that we won't tell people about yet, but obviously if you're watching on YouTube or you've read the name of the episode, you will already know. But I think we got an
Spoilers.
interesting discussion to have today because there's a lot of games in this genre that we're going to be talking about. So before we do that though, I know you've been playing a few interesting things, and I haven't actually played anything this week. So this is your section. What
Oh,
have you
wow.
been playing, Jeff?
Well, I just put out a review for Sword and Fairy Together Forever, which sounds like a really, really bad visual novel, or a point-and-click adventure game. It's
Looks
not.
like a great game, to be
It's,
honest.
yeah, like, it's Unreal Engine 4. It's made by a Chinese studio named Softstar. They also made that Zhong 7 game
That
last year.
we both
Um,
reviewed, yeah.
yeah, that was made by Domo Studio. Softstar is like their development house. It's like Bethesda. There's like
Okay.
different tiers
Okay.
within it. This
Good
is
to
a
know.
different team, but yeah, it's a Chinese mythology game that has been, it's the seventh of the series, um, kind of reinvented for Western audiences. It's a series that has been around for like the last like 26 years or something. And this is like a real-time combat kind of game where you can switch between up to 4 characters and perform a lot of like fantastical
Okay.
spells, summon spirits. It's gorgeous. PS5 loads practically instantly. It's really fun. It's good. The only issue I have with it, and one that I've seen a lot of people have with it as well, is the English translation is bad.
Okay.
Like this is like they translated it on Google Translate and then just submitted the script.
Oh,
It
wow.
just needed one pass, honestly. Like someone would be like, "Hey, are you the person that killed the vicious beast?" And then the guy would be like, "Good." What? It was a yes or no question. Good.
Okay,
Um,
well, that's
and
interesting.
and the subtitles and stuff, it'll have like 4 lines, and the guy will say like 6 words, and then it'll move to the next line, and I'm like, I didn't have time to read that. Um,
So they're
but
quick. They're
like
quick.
it is such a fun game still to play. I like the story and the characters of what I've
Been
able to
able to
kind of
grasp,
comprehend there.
yeah. Yeah, yeah.
Um, but
Well,
it's quite good.
we'll link the review in the YouTube video as well. So go and check out Jeff's review because he does great reviews. If you don't know, there are many reviews over on analogstickgaming.com. And I know you are working on another one, Jeff, that you can't say much about the game right now, but what is it that you're playing that you will be reviewing very soon?
Yeah. I mean, I've seen tons of people kind of promoting it on Twitter, saying they've been playing it and stuff like that. So I can't talk too much about it, but Cult of the Lamb releases next week. And I mean, if you've seen everybody's impressions on it, people like Andy Cortez and Scale Up, they've been loving it. Um, so like they are well on their way to being authentic to what that game offers. It's
Nice.
neat. Like you play as a little lamb and you kind of raise your cult. And if you've seen the
Mhm.
trailers, you'll have an idea of what to expect from that game. And yeah,
And the game releases on the 11th, is that right?
I only
That's what
know
I
when impressions are allowed and stuff like that.
Okay, okay. So, well, check out Jeff's site for that review at some point, and we will share it on Twitter as well. So, follow us on the social links below. Um, yeah, that's kind of it for what we've been playing. Because, like I said, I haven't been playing much. I've had a
Well, I got one more too.
okay, interesting. What have you been playing?
Xenoblade Chronicles 3,
Oh, of course, this is the big
which
release at
is
the
like,
moment.
I mean, it's gonna be a while before my review's out because I'm only 25 hours into what
And this
is
is a very long
potentially a
game, right?
150
Yeah.
hour game. I love Xenoblade Chronicles 2. I had some issues with it, obviously. There's a couple of those issues that do return here. But if it keeps the pace up, if it keeps doing what it's doing, it's going to be a very strong contender for my game of the year. It is
Ooh,
very
okay.
good. Combat is fantastic. The class systems are
A
fantastic. The
contender for
hero quests
Elden
are
Ring.
great.
I love that.
Yeah, it's fantastic, and it's nice to see this series get a lot of love. Like, I know it's probably the most technically demanding game on the Switch, and it definitely shows that the Switch is essentially like creaking in the floorboards running it, but it it is fantastic.
One thing I will say is from the outside, because I'm not a huge Xenoblade person. I tried the second game and it didn't quite click with me, but I liked it. It just didn't grab me enough to keep me going. But this feels like the breakout moment for the series. It feels like the moment where, for lack of a better term, your more casual audience is taking notice of this game now. Whereas before it was a very dedicated audience to this particular IP. And outside of that, it didn't really have much reach. This one feels a little bit different. It
Well, I
feels a
think
little bit bigger.
the Switch has a much bigger audience now because the last one came out like what 3 years ago or something like that.
Yeah.
Like, it came out quite a while ago, and a
Mm-hmm.
lot of people have been revisiting back to the previous games and stuff. And like, I still like some aspects of the cast for the second one a bit better, but again, I'm only 25 hours in, so some of the characters here haven't been fully fleshed out to that extent, and like the reveals and things like that. Because like, I just hit a major reveal that is like, oh, that could be interesting, and seeing how
Yeah,
that
you
plays
have to
out.
see where it goes, right? Like it's
Yeah.
that's one of the things that I think not even just with these kind of games, but every game in this day and age, players sometimes forget that things don't have to pay off straight away anymore. I think there were a time in games where things paid off very, very quickly because games were shorter, right? But in this day and age of games that are kind of like 30 hours is pretty much your minimum for any sort of narrative driven game anymore, unless it's very linear, right? And reveals and stuff like that aren't going to pay off straight away. And especially when you're talking about a 150-hour long game potentially, it could be another 40 hours before that thing pays off for you. And of course, that type of storytelling isn't for everybody, but don't don't think that those things aren't going to pay off is what I would say. Like that's my piece of advice for playing a longer game is there is going to be a payoff at some point. If it's a narrative thing, it's still going to be a payoff because it's still telling a story.
Mm-hmm.
It's just doing it over a longer time, right? It's kind of like watching a TV show compared to a movie. Sometimes a TV show takes 5 years to pay something off, right? And it's like that's where we are with gaming now. Games are not movies anymore in terms of their length. They're going for that more TV aspect in terms of how they tell their stories. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
there's the first official boss, like the first boss that ties itself to the narrative. That fight alone, if I had beat that boss and credits rolled, I'd have been like, "This
Oh
game's
wow,
fantastic."
really?
Because I was like, "Oh, just end it here. Just end it here. This is fantastic." Because it's like the music's going and this big action scenes and characters like, all right, like do it now and blah blah blah, and like,
I do
oh my
I
god,
do really
so
really
good.
want to play this game. Like everything I've seen of it, it looks brilliant and I will play it at some point I think, but I'm a very busy person at the moment and
Mm-hmm.
I am actually playing something for review, which or I will be. I basically got my code today, and
Nice.
I'll be reviewing it. We got it late because we requested late, but it will still have a review, and that is 2 Point Campus.
Okay.
So I'll be
Yeah, I
playing
played
that.
2 Point
Oh,
Hospital for a bit. Not enough to review it, but enough to like,
fair
get a
enough.
feel for it.
I mean, obviously it's out next week. The day after you're seeing this episode, actually, because I believe it comes out on um, the 9th of August.
That comes to Game Pass too.
And it is Game Pass day one, both on PC and console. So bear that in mind. And, reviews are already out for it because at time of recording, the reviews came out today. And I believe it's sitting at around an 84 on OpenCritic. So, maybe it's one that's worth checking out, especially if you played 2 Point Hospital. But I
You could
will
put two
have
doors in a single room now.
but I will have my own review for it over on outerhaven.net at some point, probably towards the end of next week, when I've actually played enough of the game to give some in-depth thoughts on it. Other than that, I haven't really played much. I've just been very busy. I feel like you could almost say, Jeff, I feel like I've been on a racetrack this week. I've been doing things at such a high speed, so many things.
Car pun, car pun, car pun.
And that is because we are going to talk about racing games today. We're going to talk about some of the best racing games ever. And this is of course just our opinion. There may be some games that come up here that you don't classify as a racing game, because I think the racing genre is a little bit muddy these days in terms of apparently any game where you drive a car is a racing game. And it's
if you got wheels, you can race it.
That's I was looking at some lists for inspiration just to kind of try and remind myself of some of the older games that I'd maybe haven't played in years. And there were things coming up on there like Driver, and it's like, I get it. Driver is a great game, but Driver isn't a racing game. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's not a racing game, it's a driving game. And I know there's a bit of a funny kind of distinction there between the two, but just bear that in mind, that there may be some games that come up in this conversation that aren't strictly what you would consider a racing game. So, Jeff, I know you've made a list. Do you have it in any kind of order? Because I actually
Not at all.
do. Okay.
Not at all.
Well, with that being said, I'm going to start then.
Sure.
And I'm going to start because I kind of did a top 5 and I've got others that I can talk about if necessary. But my number 5 is Mario Kart 8. And that is just because, Mario Kart 8 is the best version of Mario Kart made to date, without question.
Still getting tracks.
And it's, they're still adding to it. It's the best kart racing game, which is its own subgenre within racing, right? And I don't know, there's just something about it. Like, it's never not fun to play. Do you know what I mean? It's one of those games that even if you're not into racing games, this is the one racing game you'd enjoy. And I know that some people don't consider kart racers racing games in the same way of something like a GT or whatever. But it's still a racing game. You are on a track racing against other people, and it just has its own unique twist to it, and it's cool, right? Like, it's a very cool game. And I do think there couldn't be a list of best racing games, in my opinion, without this being on there. And that's why I had to put it in my top 5 personally.
Yeah, like even like with like Mario Kart, like I kind of wish that was the game that kind of showed Nintendo that like Mario Kart, but you have Mario Party, but none of these characters are in it. I think that would be kind of fun to add those guys. But in the same vein of like the kart racing games and stuff, like some of the other good ones, you get like Crash Team Racing, which was fantastic. Jack X Combat Racing was cool because it added like the Jack and Daxter storyline to it as well. Even like Sega Transformed Racing was pretty fun. But then you get some pretty middling of ones like Garfield or like Coffin Dodgers or something like that. But
oh god, yeah, it's funny because kart racing is one of those where there have been a lot of misses. There's been a lot of misfires in that subgenre.
Everybody just got. I mean, Burger King had a racing game.
Yeah. So For you though, what would be your first kind of pick? Your first racing game that comes to mind as one of the best racing games?
Back when the original Xbox was launching, um, they had a outside of the Future Shop, they had this big tour bus, and it was a big Xbox bus, and you could go on and play Xbox games before they launched. And one of the games that I had played ended up bringing out a sequel that was everything I wanted from it, and that was Rally Sport Challenge 2. Um,
Okay.
it is fantastic. I believe I'd have to double check. I thought it was made by Dice.
Oh, interesting. I
Um,
don't think I've ever even seen this game.
it is
So,
amazing. Like you would crash or whatever, and like your side window would break, and like I just remember looking at that game and being like, "This is the most realistic, photorealistic racing game I've ever seen."
Mhm.
At the time, it is so fun. It has that thing where it's like you'll be racing and then it'll show like left turn coming up or something, like like the rally drivers, they
Yeah.
have their little
Hmm.
um, assistant in the car detailing the turns. But it was just fun. It looked fantastic. It's
I think we've lost you a bit there,
Xbox.
Jeff. One
I
second.
think Forza
If you hold on, Jeff, I think we're losing you. One second.
like that Forza Horizon series. Oh, I think you.
One second. What is going on here? Sorry, people. I Jeff, I think you're back now. Sorry about that. I don't know what's going on. One second. One second.
Are you there?
Yeah, yeah. There
Because
we
I'm
go.
getting 1 gig per second right now.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on. So am I. So I don't know what's going on.
But yeah,
Sorry.
like Rally Sport Challenge 2 was just utterly fantastic. And I think like Forza Horizon kind of fills that void in regards to its type of gameplay. But I
Mm-hmm.
think that if they were to bring Rally Sport Challenge back, they could almost bring it back as like Forza Rally and have like the brand name carry it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah.
Um, but
That's
Rally Sport Challenge 2,
we'll we'll
fantastic game. And I think
we'll,
it's backwards compatible.
we'll talk some more about Forza later. Um, the next game that I want to bring up, and I could have brought up any number of games from this series, but this one sticks out as the moment where the game really broke out and then they just decided to kill it for some reason. And that was Burnout Paradise, right? Like, Burnout Paradise at the time may have been the best racing game ever made. It did some very unique things. It took a genre and completely refreshed it. And that was something that other games weren't really doing then. It was also filling the void of a lack of what I would say was good Need for Speed games at the time.
Mm-hmm.
um, it was doing a lot of things, and we obviously haven't seen a Burnout game since, right? But when you talk to people and you talk about racing games, that is one of the ones that comes up all the time, to the point where they remastered it, and there are people who played it for the first time like 10 years after it came out, and they still thought it was great. It's
Mm-hmm.
like, it's so there was something about that game. And don't get me wrong, I like Burnout Revenge, I like all the other Burnout games. I think they're brilliant games, and
Yeah.
I think they always have been. But Paradise felt like a special game. Paradise felt like a game that actually changed the genre of racing games in a way that nobody really expected it to. And we've obviously seen since Paradise what games like Forza Horizon have become, and they've definitely taken inspiration from Burnout Paradise. And yeah, it's such a shame. It's such a shame that we don't get to see more of that Burnout franchise. Hopefully, it returns one day, because I think it had its own unique things about it, its own unique
Yeah.
twist. But yeah, I
Like
will. It's. I think it's one of those games that if somebody said to me, "Okay, I want to play 3 racing games. What are the racing games I should play?" That would be one of them. So It
Yeah, like
had to be on my
for
list.
for Burnout Paradise, I like the racing aspect of it, in regards to kind of how it played, how big the worlds were. I still think Burnout 3 is probably my favorite of it.
Mhm.
Um, my
That's a lot of
favorite parts
people's
of
favorite as
Burnout
well.
was the staged crashes, which Paradise didn't have. Paradise had open world crashes that were not as static, so
Yeah.
they were a little bit more organic in how certain things happened. The thing that I loved about 3, if I'm remembering it correctly, is you would have like that particular stage as a crash challenge, and it was all static, so you would just try and find like the best turns and flips
The
and
way to
crashes,
crash, right? Yeah,
and that
yeah.
was my favorite part. So when
I
Paradise
remember,
removed that, I was a little
yeah. So I was
disappointed.
gonna say because I remember that from Burnout Revenge,
It could be from Burnout Revenge then. It's been
which
way too long.
where it was they literally had like a dedicated crash mode, and you had to try and cause as much damage as you could.
Yeah, that was my favorite
That
part. So
was
when Paradise
brilliant.
kind of removed that
Hmm.
canned kind of like mission
Yeah.
structure, I was a bit disappointed in
I can
Paradise.
understand that for sure. I can understand that for sure. But like I said, for me,
Yeah,
Paradise just sticks out as the one where that's the game that people remember when they talk about Burnout, right? If you're someone, and sure, you know, if you're someone of a certain age, maybe you remember Burnout 3 more
are
because
you
I
saying
know
I'm
that
old? Are you saying I'm old, Jordan?
I know that that is considered one of the best racing games of all time, Burnout 3. Um I think at one point IGN actually did say that that was the best racing game of all time. So,
It
you
didn't have
know,
too much water.
yeah. But what else have you got on your list over there, Jeff?
Kind of keeping it within that novelty kind of racing and stuff like that with Burnout is something like Split Second, which was
Okay, I
so
never played
fun.
Split Second.
Yeah, it was like a reality show based racing game where like every lap something would happen that would cause catastrophic changes to the track. So you'd be racing and then a plane would crash or like
That
a
somewhat
something would,
reminds me. That somewhat reminds me of a game called Stuntman. There was some Stuntman games back in the day,
yeah.
and you would obviously be like on a movie set performing these stunts, and that sounds like it maybe took a racing game and took some inspiration from that, where it's like, okay, let's have these tracks change
Yeah.
and be a
Split
bit more
Second
dynamic.
was just so much fun. Like it was such a neat mechanic where like yeah, like you'd be racing and then the next lap something would happen and it would cause a detour and it would change where the course goes and it was really decent. It was around that time when everybody was like, "Hey, let's just make some type of novelty racing game," whether it was like Blur, which was like Mario Kart with like actual cars. Um,
Isn't it weird that we've got to like up till probably 2010, 2011 maybe, there were tons of racing games across all different subgenres and whatever. And now we maybe get one racing game a year. Do you know what I mean? Outside of
yeah.
your annualized franchises like your F1 games, we maybe get one racing game a year, and yet
I think
te-
like one from like a big studio because like usually you'll see like five or six a year of whether it's like smaller
yeah,
types of studios.
we had things like Hot Wheels, right? We had things like the Hot
Yeah.
Wheels game and stuff like that. But I mean, I know that EA have recently announced that they are bringing back obviously Need for Speed, and I think they've said it's going to be this year. But if it's going to be this
Yeah,
year,
there's some reveal coming up
shouldn't they give
later
like a
for it.
date
I
pretty soon?
think Codemasters is working on something
I
like that.
think so. I think so. So that's going to be interesting to see. But talking about Need for Speed, I think one of the greatest racing games of all time is Need for Speed Underground 2 on the PlayStation 2. I think this game was like it was a must-own game. Do you know what I mean? That's what it
Hmm.
was at the time. It was a must-own game. I literally didn't know anyone who wasn't playing it. Every single person I knew who was a gamer was playing this game. And how often does that happen with a racing game? You know, okay, yes, that did happen more often 20 years ago because racing games really were, you know, one of the main selling points of especially the PlayStation 2.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, Underground 2, again, at the time there was no other racing game like it, right? It was doing it was doing it was doing something completely unique within the genre. It took racing off of the tracks and to the streets and put it in this kind of small open world space, but had a mission structure within it with the different types of races you could do. You still had the control over your car in terms of being able to customize your vehicle and upgrade your vehicle and all that kind of stuff. And I think that's why people hold Need for Speed in such a high regard, and why they're so disappointed in the more recent games that maybe haven't been up to that same standard, because we all know what Need for Speed can be because it's done it before. So if
Yeah,
they
they
can
tried
go back
adding
to
like the
that.
story modes and stuff, which have always been not great. Like they had that live action one,
Mm-hmm.
um, which was
Yes.
not fantastic. I think the drifting sucked in that game, so I didn't progress too much into it. And then Payback, I think is what it's called, tried that Fast and Furious kind of
And
approach.
I think Heat was the last one, right? They had was it Need
I
for
think
Speed
so.
Heat as well?
Yeah,
And
that
so
one was like everyone forgot about it a week later.
yeah, yeah. So it's really strange because I've tried a few over the years. Not I've definitely come away from kind of playing every Need for Speed game, but I have played a few of them. But none of them have ever felt like
Yeah.
Underground 2 or any of those PS2 Need for Speed games for that matter.
Oh God, tying it back to like Burnout in a lot of ways. Like when Need for Speed One, I hit the PS1, I think, the very
Mm-hmm.
first one. I remember like um, setting a car up and causing like a blockade. I think it was in co-op or something, and then just revving down this straight road and hitting it and crashing. And like I think I created Burnout Revenge. I think I created the Burnout franchise there. But yeah, Need for Speed was always fun. I'm like, Underground and whatever, hitting like that cultural stride with like what Fast and Furious was kind of bringing. Like when you get that like car culture and like street racing and stuff, it did remarkably well for what it was, and it honestly, I'm still shocked that Need for Speed never evolved into the Fast and Furious license. I figured EA would have snapped
Yeah,
that
I
up
know,
and
right? Yeah.
converted it into
And
something.
the weird thing is both of those things started around the same time. If you're a movie watcher, you'll remember that I think the first Fast and Furious movie was in 2001, and I believe that the when Need for Speed took that kind of underground racing spin was kind of in the early 2000s as well. So they were around the same time. And it's weird. It is weird, like you say, that seemed like a match made in heaven in many ways, because Need for Speed was Fast and Furious, right? It was the game version
Diesel loves video
of.
games. It just would have worked. But yeah, like Underground was fun. Like the customization you could do and all that kind of stuff. Like
Mhm.
it was fun. Like all those games, like Need for Speed, like even Most Wanted was fantastic. Um, but yeah, like the Need for Speed series has been one of the biggest racing franchises to just drive off a cliff.
Yeah, yeah,
Like it
I
used to
agree.
be like the pinnacle of EA's racing catalog, and now it's a franchise that no one cares about.
Yeah, like literally nobody cares anymore, right? And that's crazy because not only was it the pinnacle of the EA catalog there with the racing games, it was probably the pinnacle at one stage of all racing games. Do you know what I
Yeah,
mean?
it was
So
like the biggest racing game for a very, very long time.
yeah, so it's weird. And
Yeah.
talking about big games that have had a bit of a descent, we'll say, over time. They haven't necessarily fallen off of a cliff, but they've had a descent. I want to talk about a game that I actually brought up last week on the show, which is Gran Turismo 3, because I think this game is crucial to one, it's crucial to PlayStation. I don't believe PlayStation would be where they are without that game. Because that was very much, again, a moment in time, right? Like I remember like my two older brothers going to get this game midnight, and there were like thousands of people waiting to get this game, like not even hundreds. There were like thousands of people.
We have
And
17 copies.
and it's just like it was one of those games that everyone knew, right? Like I didn't really even play racing games at that time, but it was the racing game that I knew. And
Mm-hmm.
and it was the pinnacle. Like it was for that simulation based track racing
Well, no
style.
one was doing simulation when Gran Turismo came out.
Precisely. Precisely. So
Not
especially
to that
on
extent, anyway.
especially on console, right? So
Yeah.
to be able to do that, and kind of, obviously we see where it is now with the latest entry and stuff like that, and I'm not saying that that's a bad game. I'm not saying, but when
Just
you
get a second job to afford those cars.
when you think about where that franchise was, it does make me think of a comparison to Need for Speed there, because it's a similar sort of thing, right? People don't talk about GT the same way they
Especially 4,
were.
5, and 6
Yeah, yeah.
and Prologue.
And then you had GT Sport as well, and I don't know what happened there. That was like half of a game if you were lucky.
Yeah.
It's a weird situation. Obviously, they are rectifying it a little bit because people do enjoy the new game. And it is a good game. They've done some really good stuff there. And I think they've done some stuff better than any simulation game for racing has ever done it, right? But when you compare where they are now as a franchise to where they were 20, kind of 15 years ago, even, do you know what I mean? Like, even GT4 was still a massive success. And
Yeah.
then after that was where they really sort of started to falter there. And they're just not spoken about in the same way anymore. But I just think back to GT3, and I think that PlayStation owes a lot to GT3 for one, but I also think racing games in general owe quite a lot to GT3 and the GT series, right? So yeah,
Yeah, like I never played, I think, 3 onwards other than demos.
okay.
I remember playing 1 like crazy, 2 quite a bit, but simulation racing games have never been my jam. Like Forza Motorsport, I bought them, I played them. I don't love them.
Yeah.
Forza Horizon, however, that's a completely different story. But then
Mhm.
again, that pulls towards that
Very
I
different
prefer
style of game, right?
arcade style racing. Like if I'm ripping around corners and screaming through jumps and all that kind of stuff, like that's where that kind of thing works for me. But
Yeah.
simulation racing games, and like they've had their copycats and stuff, because I think like Top Gear or something made it, not Top Gear.
I'm gonna
I
come
can't remember
back
the
to you come back to you in a second, because you just mentioned Top Gear, and that made
yeah.
me think of on the 360. I think it was Forza Motorsport 4, so it was before Horizon existed. They had a Top Gear tie-in where they allowed you to play football in cars, right? And this was before Rocket League was a thing and all that sort of stuff. And it was like, Forza Motorsport 4 could have easily been on my list here,
Yeah.
because I think I think that in many ways it's a better game than some of the other games that I've mentioned. I think it's probably a better game than GT3, but it doesn't mean to the genre what GT3 means. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And I loved Forza Motorsport 4, but part of that was what I made the game myself, right? Which was I played online with friends. We would go on a we would go on a very simple track. and one of us would sort of park our car across the finishing line, and we would take turns to hit each other's cars and see how far we could send them down the track, and things like that. And those were
Hmm.
the 360 days that we all loved, where craziness just happened online, regardless of what game you were playing.
Yeah,
But that's kind of where it lives in my memories. But yeah, I don't know. Like it didn't quite make the list because I know what you mean about simulation games. They're not as much for me as well. Simulation racing, like I enjoy them enough,
it's
you know.
simulation versus spectacle, and I prefer spectacle when it
Yeah,
comes to racing
and
games.
and that I want to come to you in a minute because I know you've got some really interesting ones to talk about. But for me personally, the game that I would consider the best racing game of all time, and it could be either of these, is Forza Horizon 5 or Forza Horizon 4. I think
Mm,
without question, like I don't think it's even close because I actually think that they straddle that line quite well between having simulation elements where you can make it more of a simulation game
yeah,
if you choose to, or you can make it more of an arcadey game if you choose to. And that's not to say that it's as good as the best simulation game, right? But it's better than the best arcadey game. Do you know what I mean? So it's kind of like it tries to do this in between thing because it's trying to be something for everyone, but it perfects so much of what it does
hmm,
that how is it not the best? Even if it's not the best at every single thing, which it isn't, no question, it's not the best at every single thing. But I'll tell you one thing that it is, every second you're playing it is fun, right? Like, and the other thing is they've got this progression system. If you've never played it, where have you been for one? But they've got this progression system where you can progress through the game however you choose. You don't even have to do races outside of a few very select
yeah.
situations to progress through the game. And what other racing game can you say has that kind of system? Like you literally can progress the single player campaign by playing in multiplayer. Like, there are so many things you can do. You can play games of tag with your car with
Hmm.
friends, and you're earning experience, and all this kind of stuff. So how is it not the best game? Like, I don't. And maybe you've got some other suggestions there, Jeff. But for
Yeah,
me,
like
it's
Forza
not even
Horizon
close.
4 and 5 are fantastic. Like they are unbelievably good racing games. Um, if I had to choose between two of them to play forever, I would probably say 4 just because the seasons I think is one of the most
Interesting.
impressive things.
Interesting. I would edge towards 5, but
Yeah,
that's because I prefer the map.
yeah.
Like
Like for me, I just prefer the map in 4 because of the seasons. Because
how it
what
changes
was
the
a
gameplay,
large
right?
body of water in one season is a frozen lake in another.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one thing that I love. And like even with Forza Horizon 5, which didn't have like the winter areas because you're in Mexico, the Hot Wheels expansion that just released does have winter areas.
So I haven't played that yet. So
So good.
I'm interested. Maybe we can jump into it together because I do want to play some of that. Um, but yeah, like for me, I know you've got some other games you want to shout out there, Jeff, and maybe once you've done that, you can give us what you would consider your best racing game if you had to choose. But for me, it's Forza Horizon 5 if I was really pushed, but if somebody said Forza
Yeah,
Horizon 4, I'd agree with them on that one as well, you know?
I'm pretty much in the same boat. I think 5, like it just feels a little better. It's almost kind of like they just had the fine tuning knob at like 9.5,
Yeah.
and then 5 just cranked it
Yeah.
essentially, and
Mhm.
it just plays so
And
fun.
I think, of course,
Um,
like you said, the seasons were a loss, right? Not having the seasons were a loss.
yeah,
Um, but I think everything else they only made better. And that's why I think 5 overall is probably a better game than 4,
yeah,
although I could understand why people prefer Forza Horizon 4, especially for, I know some people who, because they're such similar games, right? And because we are now on the fifth one, some people were like, oh, well, I've played this game already and I already like the fourth one and have all my stuff. So why would I want to kind of play it again, right? But to me, it was about having that new map to experience and having kind of some of the, I think
Yeah, I
they,
was racing as my actual car in 5,
yeah.
color and everything.
And I think, they improved some of the multiplayer stuff as well. I'm not saying that that stuff wasn't existent in 4, but they did improve upon it and they added more options. And the other thing that people maybe don't know about these games is there is user created content, right? So
Hmm.
you so
Oh, I
that
got lots of anime cars. Don't worry about it.
so one, you can find great customized cars, you can find customized races, all this sort of stuff. And it's like, so actually the amount of content in the game is near endless. Like, it's near endless. And when you've got a game that plays as well as these games do,
Hmm.
and look as good as they do, like, is yeah, I don't know, like, I feel like it's not even a debate, really. I feel like it's without it. To me, they always felt like they took the best of every single one of the best racing games before them and put those things together into one game and executed them almost perfectly. And
Yeah.
they've now got to the point where they do that every time. And it's like, some people say, oh, but why bring out a new game if all you're doing is exactly the same game, right? But then it's that thing of, but if the game is that good, why change it? Why change the game if it's already that good? Do you know what I
Yeah,
mean?
I think my only critique of like what 5 did that would, I guess, impact my experience whatsoever would be I am very tired of the festival
Yeah.
approach
Mm-hmm.
and the really, really bad acting when it comes to the
The voice
people,
acting and stuff.
where it's
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
hey, we're here at the festival, blah blah blah, and all these
I
people like
agree.
chatting
I
with
agree.
you and the personalities and stuff. Like, I'm like, oh
Yeah.
my god, just shut up.
I mean, I don't. It doesn't affect me because I'm not really. I tune that stuff out. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
It's like it's automatic. But I would absolutely agree with you that that voice acting is just, unfortunately, it's bad. I
it
don't
just
know what.
reminds me of those like press conference stuff, like when they showed off like the division and they had those people
Yeah.
chatting like they
Mhm.
were in a multiplayer
It's
match.
almost too scripted, right? It's almost
Yeah,
too scripted. Um,
yeah,
I agree with you on that stuff, and it's like, I wonder whether the next step for a Forza Horizon game is, people may hate this, but I wonder whether it is a live service game where they literally do one more game and then they
just
just kind of,
Forza Horizon World, and
yeah,
it
and they
just
just add
becomes like a
maps
hub
over
game.
time and all that kind of, because why not? At this point, you've literally perfected the gameplay to the point where the tech you have won't allow you to better it anymore, right? Like, the technology isn't there to better it more than you have within that style of game. I don't believe. If they do that, credit to them, they're amazing at their jobs, right? But it's one of those things where I wonder whether that is the next logical step for them. Because imagine what a huge thing that would be. Like, we haven't got a racing live service game, right? We haven't got a game that is ever evolving in the racing genre. So why not? Forza
Yeah.
Horizon feels like the right one for it, right? And
Yeah, I still consider Forza Horizon 5 and 4 to be live service games because they do
because they
have
do the, like,
events and weekly things and all that stuff. Like they do have those types of things. Like, I would say it's a live service
uh,
game in the vein of what
yeah,
Outriders is to a live service
yeah.
game.
And I suppose what I'm considering is the live service version of Forza Horizon that is basically Fortnite. Do you know what I mean? Like, the Fortnite for driving games. I think that's what Forza Horizon can be.
There's
Um,
driving in Fortnite, Jordan.
Of course, but you know what I mean.
I know.
Unfortunately, Fortnite isn't going to be making this list. um, so,
Oh, I'm adding it to the list right now.
so what are some of the other kind of great racing games and driving games that you want to shout out there, Jeff?
Yeah, I'm just gonna remove Need for Speed here. All right, all right. Well, there was one title that was very, I think, influential when it comes to the arcade racing scene, and that is Ridge Racer 1 on the PlayStation 1. This
So
game was
I
so
never
fun.
played this game, but I've only ever heard good things about it.
It is really good. Like I remember R-Type 4 with the weird little like racing controller that had like a weird wheel on it. If I can find it, I'll show you it. I think I still have it. But Ridge Racer 1 is so fun. I played the crap out of that game, and yet I never owned it.
Oh, okay.
Now, the reason why I never owned it is because whenever my friend would come over, before he would leave, we would toss the game in the disc tray, and we would hit start and power and all that stuff and get it up and playing. And then we would hit the open tray, and he would take the disc, but I'd still be able to play it
Because the
because
game
it
was
loaded
loaded.
that game entirely in the RAM.
Wow.
So I could play that game as long as I didn't turn my PlayStation off. I could play that game infinitely without the disc being in the.
But that must have been like the only game you were playing, right?
Yeah, pretty
Like
much. Like I would play the crap out of that game for a week, and it wouldn't even be in the disc tray. Um, it was so fun. Like it was such a good game. It was everything, the whole game. It wouldn't
I
freeze
did
or
not
lock up or
know.
anything.
I did not know that was a thing. So there you
I think
go.
it was the only game that you could do that with.
That's
Um,
crazy.
but
That's
Ridge Racer was
crazy.
just fun. Like it controlled so nice. It was fantastic. Like they've had some missteps. I think R-Type 4 was super good. The other Ridge Racer games were all right. I know they made one a little while ago that wasn't terribly great. It's a franchise that I think it's Namco. They need to bring it back
Yeah,
so much. Like they just need to like take a look and see what Forza Horizon has done for the arcade racer in that way. It's a different beast entirely because
of
arcade
course.
racers you think leaderboards at the end of a race and all that kind of stuff and entering your name and just slapping down a. But Ridge Racer was just so fun. It controlled great. It was always about like skidding and drifting around corners and stuff. Like it it feels really good to play. I kind of get that same feel from there was like an arcade racing game on the Xbox that I can't remember the name of, but
Okay.
it came out like I don't know like 2 years ago, and it had like dinosaurs and all that kind of stuff in the background, and it was very colorful and
Was
and,
it
and
Wreckfest?
no, this one was like super bright and colorful.
Oh, Onrush.
No,
Onrush?
not on Rush. I'll see if I can figure out what it is
Yeah.
as I'm going through it.
While you have a bit of a look there as well, I wanted to ask you, what are your feelings on Wipeout?
Yeah,
Because
um,
people
Wipeout
loved
was
Wipeout, right?
um, Wipeout was super fun. Like I remember, Hot Shot Racing. That's what it's called.
Okay. Okay.
Um, yeah, Wipeout was fantastic. I mean, that was where everybody learned what techno was. I don't think anyone had ever heard techno before whatsoever until like, Junkie XL and all that kind of stuff like splashed across everybody's speakers, and they're like, "What is this music?" And it was so fun. Like you had the anti-grav kind of racing and stuff, and the weapons and abilities. Like it's a franchise that again is similar to something like Need for Speed, where it was the top of its genre. It had
Yeah.
tons of copycats, and it essentially died.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
people clamor for another Wipeout in the same way that they clamor for another like F-Zero, where like this was a
Yeah.
franchise that was massively popular at its time for its fan
Yeah.
base. It had very touchstone kind of aesthetics.
So F-Zero was the other game I was going to bring up because F-Zero X in particular on the N64 for me, that was actually the
Yeah.
first racing game I ever played. and I
Okay.
still love it now. Like it's one of those where I play it now. I know those tracks off by heart. I don't even have to look. Do you know what I mean? It's that
Yeah.
kind of thing. It just comes naturally, and it's such a shame that some of these older racing franchises have died out, and some of that I don't think is to do with the quality of the games either. I think it's more to do with there's just less space for racing games these days because unfortunately the player doesn't seem to care about them as much. And I'm not saying
Yeah.
people don't care about these games, that's not what I'm saying, but the overall audience isn't as big for racing games as it was 20 years ago. Like it just isn't. You know,
Yeah.
look at
Especially when you have companies like Square Enix where they're like, oh, 8 million sales? Failure. Sorry, guys. We're shuttering
yeah,
your
I know.
studio. And racing games have never been like massive,
No, they've never
like,
been massive
you know,
sellers for sure. And I mean, that's why, you know, people often joke about kind of the player count on like Forza Horizon and stuff like that. But it's like the fact that Forza Horizon 5 passed 20 million players as quick as it did. Yes, okay, it's on Game Pass, but the point is 20 million people wanted to play the game in
mhm.
some capacity. That means it's a big successful game. Whether it was bought 20 million times or not doesn't really matter because ultimately if a game has an audience, it means money can be made off of that game. And it
And more than
means
1 million people have bought that Hot Wheels DLC as well.
yeah, yeah, precisely. And that's the thing is player player engagement is what really counts, right? Like we can talk about sales all we want, and sales are important because we know some games that haven't got sequels because they didn't sell well enough and
Yeah.
the things like that. But I'm hoping that there are signs right now that racing games are on a little bit of a revival, right? Like I said, Horizon 5 and Horizon 4 have both been massive. I think even the latest GT game did very well over on PlayStation. You
And the
know,
new motorsport
it's coming soon, right?
looks
So
amazing. And it's on Game Pass, so I mean I'll play it.
yeah.
I probably
Uh,
won't review it because I'm not a gearhead. I don't dive into
and
simulation
that's
racing
and
games.
that's the thing is like, you know, in the that game is coming out, I believe they're saying by June next year, by June 2023. And it's like, okay, we haven't had one of those for about 5 or 6 years. So there is a bit of a kind of revival for racing games right now. And I just wonder whether, with things like Need for Speed coming back and stuff like that, will we see any of these other old franchises try and have another crack at it and try and do something a bit different? Because there is space for different in the racing genre. You
Yeah,
know, like
I think we'll get different. I don't think we're going to see too many of these old games come back because I think like most of those companies, one, they're not the same development studio they were years and years and years ago.
of course,
Especially when you get something like Destruction Derby, which was so fun, and then Destruction All Stars comes out, and you're like, that is a travesty.
yeah, it was bad, right? Yeah,
But yeah, like I think it comes down to a lot of rights. I think it comes down to priorities made by the teams at the time. Because I think like right now they're like, okay, well, why would we invest resources in a game that's going to sell 2 or 3 million copies when we can make a safe sequel on something that's going to give us 10 or 15.
yeah, for sure,
Um,
for sure.
so I think like the racing games, like I don't think we're going to get something like Split Second again. I don't think we're going to get something like Blur or like
No,
you're
but
you're
some
going to
of the
get small.
but some of these bigger franchises that have name value, you might see, right? So, for
Yeah,
for example, something like a Wipeout, eventually, maybe you might
well,
see one of those.
Wipeout, I don't think so. I think like they'll tap into kind of like remaster classics and stuff. And there's
Okay.
a lot of companies that have made their own Wipeout.
Hmm.
Some of them that are even more fun than the
Yeah.
original Wipeout, and they're not seeing massive success. They're
True.
seeing enough money to cover development costs and
Hmm.
stuff. They're profitable. Yeah, but are they gangbusters? Because a lot of the market right now is driven by Twitch views, is driven
True.
by YouTube stuff,
Mhm.
like streaming. So, how many
Whereas,
streamers do you see playing racing
well,
games?
that's the thing, right? And I've noticed that recently, even with kind of writing reviews and doing the podcast more and stuff like that, even for people who are smaller in the world like us, things that we say matter to people. If I, you know, if you do a review and somebody reads on your site, oh yeah, this and that, they're more likely to buy a game, right? Like if you like that game and they trust your opinion, they're more likely to buy a game. So if you're raving about a game that they haven't heard of, they're going to pay more attention. So, and I think in the age of social media and streaming and, like you said, YouTube content, the games that win out are the ones that everyone is talking about, even if they're not always the best games. They're just the
And a
pop.
lot of those games are also paid out of an advertisement budget where they're like, okay, we're going to get this streamer and we're
Yeah,
going to
we're
pay
going
him
to pay you to play
$20,000,
it.
yeah, to play Turbo Racing 7. And then boom, like that game
For sure,
takes off, right?
for sure, for sure. So, we'll be ending here in a minute, but I do want to say, do you have any other racing games that you want to shout out before we go?
Yeah, I mean, we'll jump into some of the like almost like non-racing kind of stuff here. But briefly, I'll just say like Midnight Club was super fun. I loved playing those games. They were fantastic. They had that like Italian job
Yeah,
kind of
yeah.
vibe to them. Another racing game that I loved playing growing up was Road Rash on the Genesis. Like just smacking people on the bike when you were racing and stuff was so fun. And there's been copycats
Yeah,
like
there
crazy
has.
because EA hasn't touched that property in a very, very long time.
And they
And the
probably
copycats
never
are
will.
not great. They try and simulate that old classic feel, but they just don't have the budget to kind of keep it as a game that you want to keep returning to.
Hmm.
I think Road Rash would be a fantastic series for them to revisit in a smaller approach because I don't think they need to go like Forza Horizon levels of in
Yeah, it
depth
could. It
to
can
to
be just
create
a
it.
small game, right? Like that's the
Yeah,
thing
I
is.
miss a lot of EA's like small games and stuff,
Mhm,
whether it was like,
mhm.
you know, SSX Tricky, for
I
example, which
mean,
technically you're racing down the hill.
yeah. I
So
mean,
it is in some ways.
I am
Um,
hoping. Speaking of EA, though, I am hoping that now they have Codemasters that we may get a little bit more variety in terms of their racing games, because they've
yeah.
obviously got Criterion as well, who I think are working on Need for Speed, and they originally made Burnout, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, so is there going to be a situation where maybe Codemasters take over Need for Speed? Because I know they've been helping out on that.
Well, let me put an additional question on that that leads into
Mm,
your your question there. Let's say Need for Speed comes out in I don't know December because
yeah.
November is crowded like crazy
Yes.
and it bombs.
Hmm.
Where's the future of Need for Speed?
At that point, I don't know, because at that point, that's what, like the fourth failure in a row, if not more than that. So at that point, why do you not give Burnout another go? You know, like,
Yeah, like I think honestly, if Need for Speed was to, if they were, I think looking to capitalize on the name for Need for Speed, reboot Underground.
yeah, I agree. I agree. I think that's
Goal customization, like have the ability to kind of like make your own map in terms of like the streets and stuff. And like
mhm.
you could have some really, really cool stuff. You could have people like literally like recreating races from Fast and Furious or that kind of stuff.
Absolutely, absolutely. So it's like I'm intrigued to see what happens there with EA, as the same as I'm intrigued to see what happens with the new Forza Motorsport game next year, because I think that's the first next gen only racing game that we're gonna have. So that's going to be interesting to see in terms of on console what have they been able to do to kind
Yeah.
of push the genre forward a bit. But if my question of the week to the viewers and listeners out there is, in an ideal world where you could just snap your fingers and make one racing franchise come back, and I'm not talking about a reboot or a remaster, I'm talking about like a new game in a series, which franchise would it be and why? That is my question to you, lovely viewers out there. So let us know, obviously on Twitter or in the YouTube comments or wherever. And I feel like, you know, we've given you enough racing games here that you probably, maybe there's a few that you forgot about, that you played 20 years ago and you didn't remember. So take some inspiration from that. And then I think we kind of said it earlier, but Forza Horizon, uh, uh, especially the later two entries, 4 and 5, are probably what we consider the best racing game ever between us. Would you agree with that,
It's
Jeff?
really good. Like honestly, it's one of the few like racing games that you do have that sense of addiction. It's not so much like because of like all the map icons and stuff. I think that gets a bit over bloated. I think there's better ways that they could handle that in regards to like not like, all right, yeah, now you're ready to race.
Yeah.
Here's
Well,
four thousand things to do.
it's like any game, right? It's like we always say: is no matter how good a game is, no game is perfect. Every game can improve.
Yeah, and as
And
much as I don't want them to do it, I kind of want them to do it, but I kind of wish like Forza would adapt almost like the Ubisoft approach where when you tackle something, it litters the map in that area
yeah,
to kind of,
because
shepherd
then
progression that way.
over time, you're seeing more of the map at that point, right?
Instead of
Rather
because like
than
you'll get the map and there's like 4,000 icons and they're like do whatever you want and like there's so much choice here.
well, that's actually
Like
one thing. Before we sign off here, that's one thing that one of my friends said to me when he came into Forza Horizon 4 late. He said that the thing he struggles with is the lack of direction, because they literally let you do whatever you want, and because they let you do whatever you want from so early
yeah.
on in the game, it's hard to tackle, because it's like, okay, where do I go, what are these things, and why should I be doing them? And it's, do you know what I mean? So I
Mm-hmm.
understand that criticism for sure, but I still would remain strong in my opinion that I actually think right now it's just like, it's almost like everyone else is chugging along in first gear. Do you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
Forza Horizon's just way out there, fifth gear, kind of, just
Yeah.
leaving everyone behind. Essentially, that's
Pretty
what it
much.
feels like, and I'm intrigued because I don't know if we're going to get another one of those for a while with that team, potentially not working on
Well,
Forza
they're on,
Horizon anymore.
they're on Fable now, so maybe we'll get a magic spell where a card like zips around and hits a couple goblins. But we've kind of teased up it as well, and we'll I think ended here. But like the non-racing games, like stuff that has driving, people consider to be kind of in that category. You get things like Twisted Metal, which is super fun. It's all car based.
Yeah,
You get
yeah,
things
yeah.
like Simpsons Hit and Run,
Mm-hmm.
which is vastly beloved. Things like Crazy Taxi, like
Oh,
those
Crazy
types of
Taxi! I
games.
love Crazy Taxi. I mean,
Like where would Offspring be if it wasn't
maybe
for
that's
Crazy
your
Taxi?
maybe that is your second question for the week. Okay, so you get two this week because I didn't give you one last week.
Dos Costinos.
What driving game that isn't a typical racing game would you say is the best? So that's your question. That's your second question for the week. So the first one is, what racing franchise would you like to see get a new entry?
Jack
You know,
X Combat Racing 2.
and then the second question is, what driving game but not typical racing game do you think is the best? And with that being said, I'd like to say thank you for joining us for this 106th episode. Jeff will be back in a couple of weeks. I have no idea what we're going to talk about yet. Next week,
I have ideas.
next week I believe that I'm going to be ranking Yakuza games with MBZ. He's coming back next week, and I
Nice.
think we're going to be ranking Yakuza games. So that's going to be interesting. And yeah, obviously follow us in the social links below. You can find Jeff at Necromancer on Twitter. and
Yeah, and Analog
analogstickgaming.com.
STK Gaming, or
Yes.
Analog STK Gaming, because Twitter doesn't
Twitter's weird, but also
full amount of characters.
we'll link it below. Sorry as well for that technical hiccup in the middle. Something just went wrong with internet. I don't know. It was weird. You know how internet is, people. So sorry for that technical hiccup there. And yeah, we will see you next time. Hope you've enjoyed. Goodbye.
See ya.